Hi everyone, tonight we're going to slip into the narrow doorway of a place that, frankly, you probably wouldn't want to visit unless you were desperate. The air is warm, stale, and carries that sweet iron tang that only blood can give off. On the walls, the tools glimmer faintly, straight razors, bone saws, hooks, and clamps, laid out like instruments in a symphony of discomfort. You could mistake it for a butcher's stall, if not for the chair in the center, the basin beneath it, and the fact that I am waiting with hands that know exactly where to press and where to cut. You probably won't survive what happens here. But then again, survival was never guaranteed when stepping into the shop of someone like me. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And if you're listening right now, post your location and local time in the comments. It's fun to see where and when you're tuning in from. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise. And let's get started tonight. The first thing you would notice here is the smell. Not the sharp sting of bleach or the clean snap of alcohol wipes you might expect from a modern clinic. No, it's closer to iron left out in the rain, mixed with old wood, sweat, and just a hint of spoiled milk from the ointments in jars along the shelves. I keep those jars sealed, but somehow the smell always leaks out, crawling into your nose like a reminder that medicine was rarely pleasant. The chair in the center? Stiff leather, cracked from years of use. It squeaks when a body shifts against it. Sometimes people mistake it for a place of rest, like a barber's seat where you'd expect a shave and a pleasant chat. But the truth is, once you sit down, it's usually pain that follows. A pulled tooth, a lanced boil, or a bit of flesh cut away to stop an infection. And the basin? Always waiting underneath. It holds more secrets than any confessional. Water, spit, blood, sometimes a piece of tooth that rattles like a pebble on the bottom. I've cleaned it more times than I can count. But stains have a way of writing their own history. Old wisdom says, "The man who holds the knife holds the truth." It's a saying I heard from my own master years ago, back when I was the one fetching rags and sharpening razors. At the time, I thought he was joking. But when you've got another person in your chair, sweating, begging, maybe cursing your name, you realize there's no truer position of power. And that power is both intoxicating and terrifying. Of course, this isn't the kind of wisdom people like embroidered on pillows. Nobody wants to admit that healing has always been tangled up with hurting. Yet, here we are, with a shelf of saws to prove it. Speaking of shelves, let me tell you a quirky fact. Half of those ointment jars? They're not medicine in the way you'd think. One holds goose fat mixed with ashes, another, crushed snails suspended in oil. My personal favorite? A little pot of powdered emerald, ground so fine it sparkles like green dust. Supposed to cure stomach pains. Expensive as sin, utterly useless, but people swore by it. Funny how belief can sometimes work as well as any real treatment. Maybe that's the trick. Half my job has always been convincing people the cure would work before the blade even touched them. If you asked academics, though, they'd phrase it differently. This raises the ongoing debate about whether medieval medicine functioned more as performance than as science. And honestly, they're not wrong. I'd sometimes light candles, mutter Latin phrases I barely understood, just to look the part. People trusted ritual. It made them feel safer. Meanwhile, I was really just lining up the razor for another cut. And I should admit, sometimes, humor sneaks in, like when a man once asked me if I could trim his hair while I was already pulling his tooth. I told him sure, but only if he wanted me to leave the barber pole striped with red and brown. He didn't laugh, too busy screaming. But you've got to amuse yourself somehow. Long nights, endless screams, and the knowledge that you're one slip away from being remembered as a butcher rather than a healer. I run my thumb along one of the razors now. It's sharp enough to split a hair, though these days, my hand trembles more than it used to. The reflection in its blade is thin, stretched, and slightly warped. Maybe that's fitting. This place has warped me as much as the mirror's glass. There's a window high above, but it hardly lets in any light. Just a pale strip in the afternoon, enough to cast shadows that crawl across the chair. Sometimes I sit in the dark, waiting for the next knock at the door. The quiet between patients can feel heavier than the noise. In that silence, I swear I hear the saw rasping, even when it's sitting still, like it remembers every bone it cut through, and it's humming those memories back to me. It's strange, isn't it, how tools hold memory? I've known soldiers who swore their swords hummed before battle. Maybe my saw does the same, except instead of glory, it hums of pus, screams, and the quick prayer of someone not sure if they'll wake up tomorrow. And yet, I keep the shop ready, the tools polished, because no matter how gruesome the truth, people always come back. Pain has a way of knocking louder than fear. So, welcome to my shop. Sit if you dare. The razors are ready. The basin is waiting, and I'll do my best to keep my hands steady. But remember, this isn't the clean world you know now. This is the shop of horrors. And I am your surgeon. The shop may be quiet now, but the ghosts of the battlefield still follow me inside. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear the thunder of cannon fire and the wet slap of boots trudging through mud that never seemed to dry. You don't forget your first campaign. Mine was not glorious. It was not even noble. It was dirty, loud, and terrifying. And I was there not as a soldier but as the man with the blades who tried to keep soldiers alive just long enough to limp back into the fight. They called me Doctor. But that was a generous title. Really, I was little more than a barber who owned a saw. I wasn't chosen because I knew secrets of the body. I was chosen because I had a strong stomach, steady hands, and the willingness to cut without flinching. Old wisdom says, "He who eats bitter bread learns patience." That battlefield was my bitter bread. The patience I learned there didn't come from textbooks. It came from waiting for screams to end. Picture it. A row of tents flapping in the cold wind. Their canvas stiff with dried blood. Inside, straw scattered across the ground already blackened with use. Men lay on stretchers, some moaning, some staring silently at the ceiling as though their souls had already slipped away. My tools clattered in a bucket, razors, clamps, knives, no fancy surgical steel, just iron that rusted if you forgot to oil it. The smell was part sweat, part smoke, part death. If you've ever been near a campfire where someone tossed in a piece of fat, you might know the scent. Imagine that multiplied by 100 bodies. Here's a strange fact. On those battlefields, the safest place to sleep wasn't inside the surgeon's tent. It was under the wagons. The horses gave off warmth, and the ground smelled better than the blood-soaked straw. I tried it once, just to escape the stench, and I woke up with a mule snoring louder than a drunk soldier beside me. Funny how comfort redefines itself in war. But back to the saw. You've probably heard the stories, limbs cut in minutes, sometimes seconds. The truth is, it wasn't speed for glory. It was speed because infection waited like a wolf. Every second mattered. I remember a boy no older than 16. Musket ball shattered his leg below the knee. He begged me, "Don't cut it, sir, please," but he was already pale. Lips blue. His friends held him down. And I did what had to be done. The saw screamed. The boy screamed louder. And by the time I tied off the stump with a strip of cloth, he had fainted. He lived, at least long enough to limp back to camp 2 weeks later. I never saw him again. An academic might phrase it as, the battlefield functioned as a laboratory where necessity replaced theory. Sure, call it that. For me, it was less a laboratory and more a meat market. You learned fast because hesitation killed. And no one wanted a surgeon who hesitated. Sometimes soldiers joked to lighten the air. One shouted, "Surgeon, save the arm. I needed to hold my ale." Another, missing half his teeth, said, "Don't patch me too well, or my wife will expect me home." Morbid humor, but it worked. I even laughed once, though I regretted it when my hand slipped, nearly cutting too deep. Pro tip: never laugh mid-surgery. The noise was relentless, cannon fire outside, screams inside, saw against bone, prayers muttered in every tongue. But the quiet moments were somehow worse. When the guns fell silent. When the last soldier stopped groaning. When only the flies buzzed around the tent. That's when the weight of it all pressed hardest. Silence didn't mean peace. It meant there was no one left to save. And yes, I carried those sounds home with me. Even now, years later, when a cart rolls by on cobblestones, I sometimes mistake it for cannon wheels. Or when someone saws firewood outside my shop. My heart races before my mind catches up. My apprentices laugh when I flinch. I don't explain why. Some memories are better left unshared. Here's another old saying: the battlefield makes men old before their time. True enough. I left that first campaign with more gray in my beard than I had any right to at 25. My hands were steady, but my eyes looked tired in every reflection I caught. And yet, strange as it sounds, part of me felt proud. Proud that I could stand in the middle of chaos and do something, even if that something was crude, painful, and messy. When the soldiers called me butcher, sometimes it was an insult. Sometimes it was a thank you. I learned not to ask which. Let me slip in another odd fact. You might not know this, but many battlefield surgeons kept little notebooks. Not diaries, exactly, but records of what they cut, stitched, or amputated. I had one too. Pages filled with crude drawings. Half-legible notes about gunshot to left thigh, or arrow through shoulder. I lost mine somewhere between campaigns. Maybe that was for the best. Imagine someone finding it now, mistaking it for a cookbook with recipes written in blood. I sharpened my tools every night by candlelight. Even when my hands shook from exhaustion, the edge mattered more than anything. A dull blade was cruelty. A sharp one was mercy, or as close to mercy as I could offer. And as I dragged the stone along the razor, sparks flickering, I sometimes wondered, who would sharpen me when I dulled? Because dulling wasn't just for blades. It was for men too. You can't watch life drain from eyes 100 times without it filing down something inside you. At first, I told myself I was becoming stronger. Later, I realized I was becoming emptier. Still, when the campaign ended, when the soldiers limped home, when the tents came down and the fields grew quiet, I packed my tools and walked back to the village with my head high. I told myself I had survived, but survival doesn't mean wholeness. It just means you're the one left holding the saw when the noise stops. And the ghosts? They marched back with me. Silent, patient, waiting. The saw is not supposed to sing, but mine did. At least, that's how it felt when the teeth bit through bone in a rhythm I came to recognize as surely as a lullaby. High-pitched, shrill, scraping at first, then a deeper rasp as the blade cut down. If you were unlucky enough to hear it, I promise you'd never forget it. And if you were the one lying beneath it, well, chances are you wouldn't be hearing much afterward at all. It's strange. Most people remember lullabies as gentle tunes from childhood. Rock-a-bye baby, that sort of thing. My lullaby was the music of necessity, the soundtrack of war and pestilence. There's a lesson buried in there somewhere. Old wisdom says, the same sound that soothes one ear may haunt another. For the soldier saved, the saw song meant life, however painful. For me, it meant another night without sleep. People sometimes ask, though never to my face, how I could stomach it. The truth? You don't think about it in the moment. The body switches into a strange autopilot. My hands moved with practiced speed. My eyes fixed on the task. If I paused long enough to think, I might freeze. And hesitation was worse than the cut itself. A clean, fast slice, that was mercy. Here's the oddest fact. Many of us, myself included, began humming while sawing. Not loudly, not cheerfully, but just a low note. Steady and mechanical. It wasn't for the patient, it was for us. A way to keep rhythm. To keep the hand moving true. Some surgeons preferred prayers. I prefer to hum. It drowned out the screams better. Now, don't imagine me some stoic hero. I shook afterward. My shirt clung to me with sweat. I vomited behind tents more than once. But during the cut, silence inside me, hum on my lips, saw in hand, almost like a craftsman carving wood. That's the joke I used to tell myself. I could have been a carpenter. Only the wood screamed back. Academics love to debate whether our crude amputations saved more lives than they ended. Some argue we doomed more men to infection than we spared from blood loss. Personally, I don't have the numbers. All I know is that without the saw, men bled out in minutes. With it, some lived, some didn't, but at least I gave them a chance. And really, isn't that what any doctor, real or makeshift, offers? A chance. The smell of sawing, yes. There's a smell, burning, but not from fire. Friction between blade and bone gives off a faint scorched scent. I never told anyone that. You're the first I've admitted it to. I joke about it sometimes. Darkly. Smells like Sunday roast. No one laughed. Not even me. But the thought slipped in. Unwelcome. Every time the saw cut deep. Let me throw in a quirky fact to lighten this gloom. Did you know early barbers sometimes sang while pulling teeth in town squares? They said the rhythm calmed nervous patients. I suspect it was more for their own nerves. Perhaps that's where my humming habit came from. An echo of a barber's stage act centuries old. Not every patient was brave. Some thrashed like fish, breaking straps, nearly toppling the table. Once, I had to sit on a man's chest while sawing his leg, praying I didn't crack his ribs before I finished. Another time, a soldier begged me to cut the bad spirit out of his arm instead of the arm itself. He thought demons lived inside the wound. I almost wished he were right. Demons I could fight. Infection, I could not. There's an old saying, a dull knife makes a cruel cut. I lived by that. Each night, after the saw had sung itself hoarse, I sharpened it by candlelight. The scrape of steel on stone was my evening prayer. I whispered to myself, sharper, faster, kinder. Strange mantra, but it kept my hands steady. The rhythm of the saw crept into my dreams. Sometimes I'd wake with my hands miming the motion, my jaw clenched tight, humming in my sleep. My wife once asked, "Who do you sing to at night?" I didn't answer. Better, she thought me odd than haunted. And yet, I'll admit this quietly, the saw became almost a companion. Its handle worn smooth by my grip, its blade reflecting candlelight like a trusted friend's eye. I knew its weight as well as I knew my own hand. We grew old together. The saw and I, a lullaby shared between butcher and blade. There was a strange comfort in that. Comfort, and also horror. Because when you find comfort in something meant only for pain, what does that say about you? Here's where the academic types love their phrases. The normalization of violence within medical necessity reflects the blurred boundary between healer and executioner. Sounds clever, doesn't it? But I didn't feel like either. I felt like a man doing the only job left undone when everyone else fled. And here's another small joke. One I'll give you for free, if you ever hear me humming in the barber's chair. Don't worry, I'm probably just thinking of soup. Probably. The saw's lullaby was not only for soldiers, plague victims, accident victims, even townsfolk with gangrene from frostbite. All heard it sooner or later. My little shop rang with its tune more than once. Outside, people pretended not to hear. Inside, we all knew its music meant one thing. Someone had run out of other options. Even now, when the world outside feels calmer, when wars are stories and plague is whispered like a ghost, sometimes at night I catch myself humming. Low, steady, like the saw's old song. My wife says it puts her to sleep. She has no idea. So yes, the saw had a lullaby. And though I laid it down years ago, I sometimes fear that when I die, it will be the first sound to greet me on the other side. Teeth biting bone, rhythm steady, humming in my ears. A lullaby no child should ever need. If you think the saw was bad, wait until I tell you about bloodletting. The ritual of opening veins, draining cups, and calling it medicine. It wasn't just battlefield stuff either. It was everyday business. Men, women, children, rich and poor alike came to my chair expecting relief through a cut. And I, steady hand and steady face, obliged them. Imagine walking into my shop on a market day. Fresh shaves in one corner, hair trimmings in another, and near the window, bowls, leeches, lancets gleaming under the light. The line between barber and surgeon blurred so much that the striped pole outside still told the story. Red for blood, white for bandages. Old wisdom puts it neatly. The body is a vessel. Let too much fill it and it must be emptied. It sounds poetic, but it was often just messy. A man would sit, arm outstretched, sleeve rolled back. I'd tie a strip of cloth above the elbow, tap the skin, find a vein. Then, with a flick, the lancet pierced, and the blood flowed into a cup or bowl. Some fainted, some cursed, some sighed with relief. One farmer told me, "Feels like the devil's leaving through my arm." I nodded, though privately I suspected the devil had better doors. Here's a quirky fact. In certain villages, people scheduled bloodlettings according to the phases of the moon. Never bleed under a waxing crescent. One old woman insisted, "That's when the blood grows wild." I didn't argue. A paying customer is a paying customer, no matter the lunar phase. The ritual had rules. Too much blood taken, and a patient might collapse. Lips pale as snow. Too little, and they claimed nothing had been cured. Finding that balance became part art, part guesswork. The trick was to stop before the room spun or before the patient's complaints turned from headache to dizziness. Academics today debate whether bloodletting was entirely foolish or sometimes effective. They toss around phrases like, "The practice reflected humoral theory's dominance over empirical observation." Fine words, but in practice, some patients swore it cured them. Maybe it was relief, maybe suggestion, maybe luck. Whatever it was, they came back, and I cut again. Children were the hardest. Their small arms, their wide eyes fixed on the bowl filling with their life. One little boy whispered to me, "Don't take too much, sir. I needed to run." I smiled, as though it was a game. But my heart twisted. He lived, though I doubt it was because of my lancet. Here's another old saying, better to lose a little blood than to drown in it. People believed fevers, coughs, even bad dreams came from excess. Out the blood went, and with it, they hoped, the sickness. I sometimes wondered if the ritual itself was the medicine, the ceremony of being cared for. The belief that something was leaving the body. Faith, not science, flowing into the bowl. And yes, we used leeches, ugly, wriggling things kept in jars by the window. They attached themselves like greedy little priests, sucking until they swelled purple. People trusted them more than the lancet. The leech knows when to stop, they said. I disagreed. More than once I had to pluck a leech off before it drained a man faint. But the sight of those creatures doing their work gave a strange comfort to nervous patients. Here's a lighter aside. One apprentice of mine tried to sell extra leeches at the tavern, claiming they cured hangovers. He was half right. They didn't cure the head, but the sight of them certainly scared men sober for a few hours. Bloodletting wasn't confined to sickness either. Knights before a joust, merchants before a long voyage, even brides before a wedding, they all sought the lancet. A ritual of cleansing, as if lighter blood made lighter burdens. I took their coins, tied their arms, let the crimson flow, and afterward, they thanked me with pale smiles. But for me, each cut added to the quiet tally inside my mind. A tally not of lives saved, but of drops taken. Each bowl emptied into the ground felt like a secret shared with the earth. I sometimes wondered if the soil itself grew fat with our folly. The hum of the saw haunted me at night, but the sight of blood swirling in bowls haunted me in the day. Too bright, too vivid, always swirling in the same circle, like watching time itself spin down a drain. Still, I performed it because that was the trade. People trusted the ritual, and trust itself can heal more than knives. Perhaps the ritual mattered less for the blood and more for the belief. Humans are funny that way. Give them a ceremony, and they'll find comfort even in pain. And sometimes, though I hate to admit it, it did work. A fever broke, a cough eased, a headache vanished. Placebo, luck, or strange truth, I'll never know. But when a mother clutched my hand after her child slept peacefully, I didn't argue. I just cleaned my lancet and nodded. Old rituals die hard. Even now, when the science moves on, I see neighbors prick their fingers to let the sickness out. Maybe we never fully abandon our lullabies, whether sung by saw or leech. Maybe part of us needs the cut, the flow, the ritual, even if reason says otherwise. And so the bowls filled, the veins opened, and the belief endured. Bloodletting, equal parts medicine, theater, and faith. And I was merely the man who played the role. If the saw was my lullaby and the lancet my ritual, then the leech jar was my little theater of horror and wonder. Imagine a glass vessel half filled with murky water. Inside it dozens of wriggling, glistening bodies sliding over one another like animated shadows. To me, they were tools. To my customers, they were tiny prophets. Old wisdom says, even the smallest creature may heal the largest wound. And people clung to that idea when they saw the jar. They believed the leeches knew more than I did, that the slimy worms could sense sickness and draw it out like smoke through a chimney. In truth, the leeches simply followed appetite. But I didn't correct anyone. Why ruin faith with fact? Here's a quirky tidbit. Some households kept leech jars in their kitchens, right next to the herbs and salt. Imagine reaching for thyme and brushing against a jar full of sucking worms. I once saw a child mistake one for a licorice sweet. The screaming that followed nearly emptied my shop of customers for a week. The ritual went like this. A patient rolled up their sleeve, or sometimes bared their neck, and I'd reach into the jar, fingers brushing over slick bodies until one latched onto my skin. I'd pluck it off, still wriggling, and place it gently where the vein ran closest to the surface. The leech did the rest, mouth latching, teeth pricking, blood flowing. Within minutes, the creature swelled like a bloated wineskin. Some patients giggled, finding the tickle almost pleasant. Others shuddered as though touched by the devil himself. A soldier once swore the leech whispered his sins while drinking. I told him that was the ale speaking, but he insisted, pale as chalk, until I pried the thing off. Academics argue about whether leeches truly cured illness or merely delayed it. They use phrases like, the efficacy of heredotherapy remains a contested point in the historiography of medieval medicine. Sounds grand, doesn't it? To us, it was simpler. If the fever broke, the leech earned its keep. If not, well, we tried again tomorrow. Leeches weren't picky. Arms, legs, even eyelids if the swelling was bad enough. Yes, you heard me, eyelids. Picture that. A fat, wriggling worm swelling bigger and bigger while hanging from your eye. Patients flinched, but they didn't run. Belief was stronger than disgust. Here's another odd fact. Leeches could drink up to 5 times their own weight. Afterward, they'd drop off, sluggish and fat, leaving the patient with little more than a trickle of blood. We sometimes kept the engorged ones in a separate jar to rest. A jar of drunk worms. The boys in the shop joked it was our tavern for leeches. Not every treatment went smoothly. Once, a leech crawled up a man's nose before I could stop it. He sneezed blood for 3 days. Another time, one refused to drop off, clinging stubbornly until I had to burn it with a coal. The smell? Like wet leather and rot. Not pleasant. Still, leeches had their place. They were clean, precise, even elegant in their way. No jagged saw marks. No messy cuts. Just quiet drinking. Patients often closed their eyes and pretended they were napping while the creatures worked. Some said the soft tugging reminded them of childhood, though I tried not to think too deeply about that comparison. An old saying goes, better to trust the leech than the sword. Perhaps that was true. At least the leech wanted no war. No glory, just dinner. And if dinner also soothed the fever, all the better. Here's a lighter story. A merchant once tried to impress me by naming each leech in my jar as if they were pets. This one is Gregory. That fat one, Thomas. The little wriggler, Anne. He paid double for me to use Gregory on his swollen leg. Gregory, naturally, fell off halfway and slithered under the table. We never did find him. The merchant limped out swearing I'd stolen his friend. Behind the humor, though, was truth. People humanized leeches because it gave them comfort. Better to see a hungry companion than a parasite. Better to believe in intention than appetite. At night, when the shop was quiet, I sometimes held the jar to the candlelight. Dozens of shadows twisting, tails curling, mouths forever searching. I wondered if I was any different. Always reaching, always cutting, always feeding, not on blood, but on the trust of desperate people. The leeches reminded me too much of myself. Academic debate aside, I cannot deny this. Leeches worked sometimes. Infections eased, swellings softened, and when they didn't, the patients still thanked me for trying. Perhaps that was their greatest gift, not healing, but hope. Even today, when I hear rain splashing in gutters, I think of the leech jar. Slimy bodies sliding over one another. Always hungry, always ready, and though I emptied the jar years ago, I sometimes dream that one still wriggles in the dark corner of my shop, waiting patiently for its turn. So yes, the leech jar was part of my world, part medicine, part theater, part nightmare, and like the saw and the lancet, it left a song of its own echoing in my mind. A wet, slippery tune I'll never quite forget. You learn quickly, as a so-called surgeon, that pus has its own politics. Too much, too little, the wrong color, the wrong smell. Every detail meant something. Or at least, people thought it did. Truth be told, I became half healer, half fortune teller, reading the signs in the ooze of wounds. Old wisdom tells us, the body speaks before the tongue. In my world, it spoke through pus. Picture a soldier staggering in with a wound to his thigh. The fabric of his trousers stiff with dried blood. When I peeled it back, there it was. A river of yellowish fluid. Warm and foul. The men around him gagged. I, on the other hand, leaned closer. Not because I enjoyed it, mind you, but because I had to know, was this the good pus, or the bad pus? Yes, that was a real distinction. We called the thick, creamy discharge, laudable pus. It meant the body was fighting, driving corruption out. Thin, watery, foul-smelling liquid? That was death whispering through the wound. Of course, neither was particularly pleasant to deal with. But the difference often decided whether I cleaned and dressed or sharpened the saw. Here's a quirky fact. Some townsfolk believed that if you touched pus with your bare hand and rubbed it on a wart, the wart would vanish. I never tested it. I had enough filth on my hands without adding folk remedies, but people swore by it. Superstition and medicine mixed like ale and water, indistinguishable once poured together. And the smells, the smells, sweet almost, like spoiled milk, or acrid like rotting fish. I could walk into a room blindfolded and tell whether a man had days or hours left simply by scent. Not exactly a skill you brag about at a tavern. What's your trade, sir? Oh, I sniffed pus for a living. No wonder I drank alone. Academics argue about whether our trust in laudable pus was wisdom or folly. Some phrase it as a primitive recognition of immunological response. Perhaps they're right. All I knew was that a wound full of white goo had a better chance than one that stayed dry and angry. Superstition thrived in every cut I treated. Mothers tied charms around infected limbs. Priests whispered blessings over boils. Soldiers swore that spitting on a wound 3 times kept rot away. Once, a man begged me not to clean his leg because the pus, he said, carried out the devil's poison. He claimed scraping it away would anger the spirits. Against my better judgment, I left it. He died 3 days later. His spirits winning the battle. Here's another old saying, better a wound that weeps than a wound that smiles. A smiling wound meant it looked fine on the surface. Neat and closed, but rotted underneath where no blade or prayer could reach. I saw too many of those. Men walking, laughing, and then collapsing the next day. Their skin blackened from inside out. Pus had strange uses too. Believe it or not, some apothecaries bottled it, mixing it with herbs to teach the body its own sickness. It sounds absurd, but in a way, it was a twisted ancestor of vaccines. A man once offered me a pouch of coins for a vial of pus from a plague sore. I turned him away, though part of me wondered if he knew something I didn't. Odd fact, cats, for reasons beyond me, seemed fascinated by the smell of infection. They'd curl beside festering wounds, purring. People called them guardians of healing. I just thought they enjoyed the warmth and stink. Still, the image of a gray cat sleeping happily beside a soldier's suppurating leg has never left me. I sometimes joked, lightly, grimly, that pus was my second apprentice. Always present, always teaching, always reminding me who held the real power. The body, not the barber. But pus also haunted me. It got under my nails, soaked my apron, clung to the straw on the floor. Even after scrubbing with lye, the smell lingered in my hair. My wife claimed she could smell it on me in church. I stopped sitting near her after that. Easier to stand alone than see her wrinkle her nose. Some nights, I dreamt of rivers, not clean streams, but yellow floods, sticky and endless. I'd wade through up to my knees, my saw in hand, the faces of soldiers floating past me like driftwood. I'd wake, sweating, swearing never to touch another wound. By morning, of course, another patient sat waiting in my chair. Superstition gave people comfort where medicine failed. I could cut, clean, and wrap, but they wanted charms, chants, and candles too, so I played along. Sometimes I muttered nonsense while tying a bandage, letting them think it was a spell. If it calmed their minds, who was I to argue? Healing takes more than knives, it takes belief. In the end, pus was not just a symptom. It was a language, a whisper from the body. Half understood, half feared, and like any language, it carried stories of survival, of failure, of superstition stronger than science. So yes, pus and superstition walked hand in hand through my shop, and I, humble barber with a saw, listened to both. Whether I believed or not didn't matter. The patients did, and belief, I learned, can sometimes be the sharpest tool of all. You've heard the stories, the bells, the carts, the cries of, "Bring out your dead." I can tell you, they weren't just stories, they were morning routines. The plague cart was as regular in my village as the rooster's crow. And if the rooster reminded us life still stumbled forward, the cart reminded us death never stopped chasing. Picture a wooden wagon, its wheels creaking under the weight of bodies stacked like cordwood, covered in rough blankets, some tied with twine, others left bare with hands dangling through the slats. The driver rarely looked up, face hidden beneath a scarf soaked in vinegar. I learned quickly not to meet his eyes, too much recognition passed between us. Old wisdom says, the eye that sees too many corpses learns to look away. I lived by that. The cart's bell was the worst part. A dull clang carried through the alleys, warning the living to step aside. Dogs barked, children cried, shutters closed. Once, I saw a boy throw a stone at the cart, shouting that it stole his father. The driver never slowed. The bell just clanged on, steady as a heartbeat. Here's a quirky fact. Some towns tried painting their carts bright colors, as if cheerful hues could disguise the horror. In Florence, they painted theirs yellow. In my village, someone suggested green. It didn't matter. No amount of paint hides the smell of rot. The cart wasn't just for the dead. Sometimes it carried the dying too. People begged me to intervene as the driver loaded their loved one. Still breathing shallow gasps. "He's not gone yet," they cried. But the driver had no patience for half measures. A plague cart didn't deliver hope. It delivered silence. And yes, I sometimes rode along, not because I wanted to, but because the guild demanded it. We barbers were called to inspect corpses, tally causes, and sometimes cut boils open to prove the pest had indeed taken them. I carried my lancet, though it felt ridiculous, like bringing a candle into a hurricane. Academics debate whether the carts spread disease more than they controlled it. You'll hear phrases like, "The aggregation of cadavers accelerated vector transmission in urban centers." Translation: piling corpses together probably made things worse. But what choice did we have? Leave bodies in the street for rats to climb over? At least the cart gave death a routine. I'll never forget one morning, mist hanging low, when the cart stopped outside my shop. The driver gestured for help. I climbed up, and there she was, a girl, maybe 12, her skin blotched black, eyes half closed. She wasn't gone yet. Her lips moved faintly. I leaned close. She whispered, "Don't let them bury me." I froze. What could I say? By the time I thought of an answer, the cart rolled on, and I lost her in the sea of bodies. That night, I drank until I forgot her face. At least, I tried. Here's an old saying, "The plague chooses kings and beggars alike." True enough, I saw noblemen tossed into carts beside beggars, their fine silk sleeves brushing against rags. The cart didn't care for titles. Death was the great equalizer, and its wheels squeaked without prejudice. But even in horror, people found rituals. Families placed sprigs of rosemary in their loved ones' hands before the cart came, believing the herb purified the soul. Children drew chalk crosses on doors, thinking it gave the dead safe passage. The driver often brushed them off, grumbling, but I noticed he never touched the rosemary. Superstition, too, has its boundaries. Here's a lighter oddity. Cats followed the carts, curious as ever, weaving between wheels as though guarding the dead. People whispered they carried the plague. Others swore they absorbed it. Either way, the cats looked fatter by the season. Opportunists, just like the rest of us. When the cart rattled away, silence followed. Not peace, not relief, just silence heavy enough to choke you. Streets looked cleaner, emptier, but the smell lingered. Always the smell, sour and thick, clinging to stone and wood long after the cart disappeared. At night, the bell rang in my dreams. I'd wake with the sound still in my ears, swearing I could hear wheels creaking outside. Once, I rose, opened the shutters, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw the cart waiting below. Horses steaming in the dark, but the street was empty. Empty, except for the echo of that bell. The plague cart taught me a cruel lesson. Medicine cannot always heal, but it can witness. Sometimes my only role was to stand there, watching bodies lifted one by one, my lancet useless in my pocket. Witnessing wasn't glory, but it was something. So yes, I remember the carts. I remember the bells, the wheels, the driver's scarf soaked in vinegar, the hands dangling limp, the little girl's whisper, and I carry them still. You don't outlive the plague. You just learn to walk beside its cart without climbing in. Every barber surgeon begins as someone's shadow. My apprentices were no different, thin boys with trembling hands, eyes wide as saucers, watching me as if I held the secrets of both life and death. And in a way, I did, though half the time, those secrets were little more than guesswork dressed up as confidence. I remember the first one, Hugo. He was barely 12, hair sticking up like a broom. His job was simple: fetch water, stoke the fire, keep the leeches fat, but he watched me constantly. The old wisdom says, a child learns more from your silence than from your words. And I learned quickly. Hugo absorbed every gesture, every grimace, every twitch of my hand as I stitched, cut, or bled a man dry. At first, he recoiled, When I sawed a soldier's arm on the battlefield, Hugo turned green and vomited behind a tree. I told him, "You'll need stronger stomach acid if you want to eat supper in this trade." He laughed weakly, though I wasn't really joking. Later, he stopped vomiting. Then he stopped flinching. One day, he stopped blinking. That's when I knew he was becoming me. There was a rhythm to training apprentices. You start them small, holding the patient's head still, passing me the iron tongs, cleaning the bloodied cloths. Then one day you hand them the knife. The first cut is always shallow, tentative. Patients notice. "Is this boy cutting me?" They'd shout. I'd shrug. "Well, he's cheaper." That joke usually bought me about 10 seconds of goodwill before the pain hit. The academic debate you'll hear is whether apprenticeship was education or exploitation. Scholars argue the lack of formalized medical curriculum left barbers reliant on experiential transmission of knowledge. Translation: we learned by doing, or rather, by doing damage until we stopped messing up. Harsh? Yes, but no book could teach you how skin feels under a dull blade. Quirky fact: some guilds made apprentices shave balloons filled with water without popping them. If they succeeded, they were allowed to shave actual faces. I never had balloons, so I used pigs' bladders filled with wine. Hugo popped 3 in a row and got drunk licking his fingers. A proud day. I watched their hands. These apprentices. At first, they shook like leaves. I teased them. "Don't worry. The blood spurts faster if you tremble." But over time, their grip steadied, their wrists loosened, and their cuts grew cleaner. One boy, Matthias, could lance a boil so smoothly the patient thanked him afterward. That was when I realized he was already surpassing me. Yet, no matter how skilled, the eyes told the real story. They started wide, horrified, begging me silently to say, "It's all right, this isn't normal." But eventually, those same eyes grew still, steady, almost bored. That scared me more than the trembling. It meant they had learned the trick I knew too well, to look without seeing. There's another saying, the master teaches until the pupil mirrors his mistakes. I saw that come true when Hugo stitched a wound too tight. The skin puckered, and the man cursed us both. I recognized my own sloppy hand in his. I scolded him, but inside, I felt an odd warmth. He was mine, flaws and all. Not all pupils lasted. One boy fainted every time he smelled pus. Another cried when he heard bones snap. I didn't blame them. The world needs bakers more than it needs sawbones. But the ones who stayed, the ones with steady eyes, those were my heirs. Sometimes, I wondered what they thought of me. Did they see a wise master guiding them through shadow? Or did they see an old butcher clinging to his craft? Once, Matthias whispered to Hugo when they thought I couldn't hear, his handshakes now. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. They were right. Odd fact. Apprentices often practiced bloodletting on each other. I caught Hugo once. Lancet pressed to Matthias's arm, both giggling as crimson dripped into a bowl. I barked, "Save your veins for real patients." They laughed, but I noticed their cut was cleaner than mine had been that morning. I confess, sometimes I envied them, their youth, their certainty, the way their backs didn't ache after a day at the chair. I envied their ignorance too, their belief that with enough practice, they could tame death. I had seen enough to know death never bowed. But I didn't spoil their optimism. Let them learn the hard way. As I did. Still, when I caught Hugo gazing at me, his eyes steady now, I felt both pride and dread. Pride, because he was ready. Dread, because my shadow was fading. And soon I would stand in his. At night, I sometimes dreamed I was the apprentice again, looking up at my own master's hands. He had trembled too. I thought him weak. Now I understood. Age isn't weakness, it's just time cutting closer to the bone. So yes, I remember the apprentice's eyes. Wide at first, then steady, then colder than mine. If they carry my skill, they'll also carry my ghosts. And I wonder, when they take pupils of their own, will they see themselves reflected in young, Trembling eyes? Will they, too, feel the ache of being replaced even as they teach? It was bound to happen. You can only hold a saw steady for so many years before someone notices when your hand trembles. At first, I thought I hit it well, pressing harder on the knife, pretending to pause for dramatic effect, blaming the candlelight. But patients notice everything, and apprentices notice more. The first whisper came from a farmer, a big fellow with a tooth rotting so badly the smell walked into the room before he did. He sat in my chair, eyes watering, fists clenched, and when I reached for my forceps, I felt the slip in my fingers. Just a little tremor, nothing fatal. I pulled, twisted, and the tooth came free. The farmer spat blood, grinned with relief, and then he looked at Hugo, standing by my side. "The boy's steadier than you," he said, half joking, half not. I laughed it off, muttering, "Maybe you'd like him to sew your breeches, too," but the words stuck like fish bones in my throat. There's an old saying, the reed bends before the oak breaks. I tried to bend, to let the jest slide, but soon, it wasn't just jokes. Whispers floated through the marketplace. "The old man shakes," they said. "Go to his apprentice. His hands don't falter." Each whisper was a splinter in my pride. And pride, it cuts deeper than any saw. One afternoon, a soldier limped into my shop. His calf gashed open, blood everywhere, but he was calm. Soldiers usually are. I reached for my needle, but before I could thread it, the man looked at Hugo. "You do it," he said, not a question, a command. I froze. Hugo looked at me, waiting for permission. My chest burned, but what could I do? The man was bleeding. I nodded. Hugo stitched him, neat and fast, not a drop wasted. The soldier praised him, pressed a coin into his hand. Not mine. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped the basin. Academics debate when authority passes from master to pupil. They write, "The transfer of practical credibility occurs when the community recognizes competence over hierarchy." Translation: the day the townsfolk trust your apprentice more than they trust you, you're done. That day had come. Quirky fact: some masters used to deliberately sabotage their apprentices, giving them dull blades or bad instructions, just to keep them looking incompetent. I considered it once. I didn't do it. Maybe I should have. Or maybe I still had some shred of decency left. The whispers grew. Hugo's hand is firm. Matthias cuts quicker. The old man's eyes blur. They didn't say it to my face, but I heard it everywhere: the tavern, the market, even at church. Once, I overheard two women gossiping. "If he trims your beard crooked, don't be surprised. His eyes are gone." They laughed. I clenched my fists until my nails cut skin. Here's another truth. You don't need enemies when you have apprentices. They're your shadows until the day they step out of your light. And once they do, the town forgets you faster than a cut heals. I remember one night, Hugo came to me, gentle, respectful. "Master," he said, "let me take the harder cases. Your hands, they deserve rest." Rest. The word stung more than any insult. Rest was for the dying. I waved him off, muttering about sharpening my blades. But when I tried to hone my saw, I couldn't keep it steady on the whetstone. Sparks flew everywhere, mocking me. Off topic, but true. Did you know falcons replace their feathers in molting season? They look ragged, weaker, almost pitiful for weeks. Then, suddenly, they're reborn sharper, faster. Watching Hugo work, I realized I was molting too, but unlike a falcon, I wasn't growing new feathers. Mine were just falling away. The worst came during a bleeding. A merchant sat in the chair, plump and pale, demanding the old ritual. I tied his arm, reached for my lancet, but the tremor betrayed me. The blade nicked too shallow, then too deep, blood spurting unevenly. The man yelped, pulling back. "Get the boy," he shouted. "Get Hugo." The whole room stared at me. My face burned hotter than the forge. Hugo stepped forward, calm, efficient, saving the man's dignity and destroying mine. That night, I drank until the tavern walls blurred. A drunk beside me laughed and said, "The boy's the real barber now." I slammed my mug down so hard it cracked. But I said nothing. What was there to say? Truth doesn't care if you're sober. Old wisdom warns, teach too well, and you teach your own undoing. I had laughed at that once. Now, it was carved into my bones. I had taught them steady hands, calm minds, and the art of looking without seeing, and they used all of it to replace me. Yet, here's the cruel twist. I felt pride, too, watching Hugo's neat stitches, Matthias's smooth cuts. I thought, they are better than I ever was. Pride and despair, braided together like rope around my throat. So yes, the whispers came, then the open comments, then the direct requests. Let the boy do it. And with every request, a little more of me vanished, until I was just the man in the corner, sharpening tools that no one wanted me to use. Ale doesn't heal wounds, but it numbs the edges of memory. And for a while that was enough. My evenings shifted from sharpening blades to draining mugs, from the hum of saw teeth to the clatter of tankards. The tavern became my second surgery, except here. The only bleeding came from coin purses. I'd sit in the corner, nursing the first mug slowly, telling myself it would be the last. But the truth? One became two became three, and after the fourth, I didn't care enough to count. There's an old saying, the bottle holds no wisdom, but men drink searching anyway. I searched plenty. The ale loosened my tongue. I found myself telling stories about the battlefield, about plague cards, about the way bone sounds when it breaks under a saw. People listened at first, fascinated, horrified, but horror dulls. Soon they rolled their eyes, muttering, "There he goes again, the old butcher with his ghost tales." So I told them anyway. Not for them, but to bleed the memories out of me before they choked me. Off topic, but did you know monks brewed the strongest ales because water was too dangerous to drink? They purified liquid with fermentation. Funny, isn't it? The same brew meant to save me also dragged me deeper into shadows. The battlefield came back to me in every sip. I'd hear the crack of muskets, the cries of men falling, the orders barked through smoke, and always, the saw, the rasping, grinding lullaby that carved itself into my skull. Even in silence, I heard it, sometimes so clearly I checked my satchel to see if the saw had started singing again. Academics argue over trauma these days, calling it post-experiential psychic fragmentation. We just called it the ghosts. And ghosts, I had plenty. They marched with me to bed, rattled chains in my dreams, and woke me drenched in sweat. Ale kept them quieter, but never silent. One night, Hugo found me slumped against the tavern wall. He tried to haul me up, muttering, "Master, this isn't you." I wanted to laugh. Of course it was me. This was all I had left. The hands that once held blades steady now clutched mugs. The eyes that once examined wounds now stared into foam. That was me, distilled into hops and regret. Another night, I made the mistake of trying to shave a man after a few drinks. My hand slipped, just a nick on his chin. Barely a drop of blood, but the look he gave me was sharper than any knife. "You're not steady," he hissed, storming out. By morning, the whole street whispered it. And so I drank more. Strange fact, sailors swore rum cured seasickness. I doubted it, but I drank like I was lost at sea, hoping the tide of memories would calm. Instead, it just made the waves taller. Sometimes, I sat alone, staring into the basin I carried everywhere. Water rippled, reflecting a face I barely recognized, lined, hollow-eyed, mouth drawn thin. The ale gave me courage to whisper to that reflection, "You were never good enough." And the face nodded back, agreeing. Old wisdom warns. What you drown returns when the tide falls. True, no matter how many mugs I drained, the tide always fell by dawn. Then came the pounding head, the sour mouth, and worst of all, the memories sharper than before, cutting clean through the fog. I noticed my apprentices watching me differently. Not with fear, not with respect, more like pity. That was worse. Pity is the final insult. A master can be feared, respected, even hated, but pitied? That means you're already a ghost, walking but unseen. One evening, Matthias approached me quietly. "You taught us well," he said. His voice was steady, gentle, too gentle. He didn't say the rest, but I heard it. "You're finished now." I raised my mug in mock salute. To my replacements, I said. They didn't laugh. Neither did I. Quirky little habit of mine. I began carving notches into the tavern table with my lancet. 1 notch per mug. By the time the innkeeper caught me, the wood looked like a battlefield of scars. He banned me for a week. I laughed and found another tavern. There are always more taverns. Yet in those drunk nights, fragments of humanity surfaced. Once, a widow sat beside me, whispering about her husband lost to the plague cart. I held her hand, clumsy and warm. We didn't speak much, but in that moment, the ghosts quieted. It reminded me why I ever picked up a blade, to keep hands warm a little longer. By morning, of course, the memory blurred, and the ghosts returned. So yes, I drank. I drank to forget the saw's rasp, the plague cart's bell, the whispers of my decline. I drank to blur the eyes of apprentices that stared steadier than mine. And though I drowned myself nightly, each dawn reminded me, memory floats. The basin had always been just a tool to me, a shallow circle of tin. Dented from years of use. Rim chipped where it had been dropped. It caught blood, water, spit, pus, the detritus of survival. But somewhere along the way, it turned into a mirror. And mirrors, they have no mercy. Each morning, I filled it with water drawn from the well. At first, I looked into it only to judge whether the surface was calm enough to shave a chin. But then my eyes started lingering. My reflection stared back, blurry, rippled, half-formed, and yet too clear. The old wisdom says, a man avoids mirrors when he no longer likes what stares back. I should have avoided the basin. Instead, I kept staring. What I saw wasn't the man who had marched with armies. Knife steady, saw sharp, eyes full of defiance. No, I saw a face sagging under years. Lines etched deep like dried riverbeds. Beard grown patchy and gray. Most of all, I saw my hands. Even in reflection, they trembled. A cruel joke. The thing I wanted to hide followed me even in water. Here's an odd fact. The Romans once polished metal bowls to use as mirrors. Soldiers carried them into battle. Not just to shave but to check if their eyes were still fierce. My basin felt like that. Except the fierceness had drained away, leaving only weariness. One morning, as I leaned over the water, I caught my breath. For a split second, I didn't see myself. I saw my master. The man who had trained me. His face had looked just like this in his final years, weary, defeated, haunted. I remembered thinking, he's finished. Soon I'll surpass him. And then it struck me, I had become him. The circle had closed, and the basin was my cruel witness. Academics love to talk about the cycle of succession. You'll hear them say things like, the inevitability of generational replacement underscores the fragility of professional authority. Which is just a grand way of saying, your apprentices will always outshine you eventually. The basin didn't need a university to tell me that. It showed me plainly, day after day. One evening, I poured wine into the basin instead of water. The reflection turned red, the color of every cut I'd ever made. My face warped, devilish, soaked in crimson. I laughed, then cried, then threw the basin against the wall. It clattered, dented further, but it didn't break. Just like me, battered, warped, but still, somehow. Here, quirky thought. Did you know some sailors believed reflections trapped souls? They covered mirrors when a man died at sea, fearing his spirit might linger there. Sometimes I wondered if the basin was trapping mine, holding it hostage in those ripples. Maybe that's why I couldn't stop staring. I was checking if I was still whole. My apprentices noticed. Hugo once asked, "Master, why do you stare so long at the water?" I shrugged it off, muttering something about needing to check my blade's sharpness. But truthfully, I was checking if there was still a man worth teaching behind those eyes. The basin also remembered things. Even after scrubbing, the smell of iron lingered. The faint tint of red clung to the rim. No matter how much I polished, I could never erase its history. And in that way, it reflected not just my face, but my failures. Every stain a reminder, every ripple a whisper. Once, Matthias cleaned it for me, polishing until it gleamed like silver. He set it down proudly. I looked in, hoping to see something new, but the same tired man looked back, lined deeper than before. I thanked him, but inside, I cursed. You can polish the bowl all you want, the water still tells the truth. Here's a lighter tangent. Carpenters often used basins of water to judge if a table was level. If the surface rippled unevenly, they knew where to shave the wood. Funny, isn't it? Even in carpentry, water shows what's crooked. My basin showed me I was crooked in ways no tool could fix. One night, after too much ale, I sat staring until the water blurred. My reflection shifted, turning into faces of men I'd cut, stitched, or failed. I saw the soldier whose arm I took, the girl who begged not to be buried alive, the merchant who mocked my tremor. All of them floated there, judging me. I splashed the water, scattering them, but when it stilled, my own tired face remained, the cruelest ghost of all. The basin was patient. It never shouted, never mocked. It only reflected. That's worse. You know, words can be ignored, silence cannot. So yes, I kept looking, day after day, until I accepted that I wasn't the steady-handed boy anymore. I wasn't even the middle-aged surgeon who thought himself invincible. I was the old man, staring into a bowl, realizing time had outcut every blade I ever sharpened. Gratitude in a town like mine was as fickle as the weather. One day, they'd raise a mug to me in the tavern, calling me the man who saved their brother's leg, the one who lanced the boil that would have killed their child. The next day, they'd spit on the ground when I passed, muttering about the scar I left, or the cousin who died in my chair. Old wisdom says, the people love their healer until they bury their dead. I lived that truth daily. I recall once saving a blacksmith's hand. His palm had split open under the hammer, blood and sinew spilling everywhere. I stitched it fast, steadied him with brandy, and he healed enough to grip the hammer again. For weeks, he toasted my name, brought me coins, even gifted me iron nails. Then, one morning, his wife died of fever, untouched by my tools. Suddenly, he called me a fraud, a butcher, a man who had stolen her life with my clumsy medicines. Gratitude to hatred in the space of a funeral bell. Quirky fact, in some villages, healers were given free bread each week, payment for keeping the town alive. In mine, I sometimes got a loaf, sometimes a stone through my window. Depends on who survived the week. Here's the academic debate. Was early medical practice perceived more as a science or as superstition? Scholars go in circles, but the truth is simpler. People didn't care what we believed. They cared only if their loved one rose from the bed or sank into the grave. Science, superstition, neither mattered. Outcomes did. It gnawed at me. Every time I walked down the market lane, I felt their eyes, some soft with thanks, others sharp with blame, sometimes both, from the same person, depending on the day. A woman once clasped my hand, tears streaming, thanking me for saving her son. Not a week later, she screamed at me in the square, blaming me for her husband's sudden cough. Gratitude is a coin that flips endlessly. Odd little detail. Children were the most honest. They'd run up, some tugging at my coat, begging me to show the leeches in their jar, giggling when the worms wriggled. Others ran from me screaming, convinced I carried death in my satchel. Maybe both were right. What stung most wasn't the curses, it was the indifference. There were days I bled men, stitched wounds, Drained abscesses until my back ached and my hands cramped, only for the town to carry on as if nothing had happened. No thanks, no acknowledgement, just the next body waiting in the chair. I was their invisible servant, needed, but never truly seen. And yet, there were moments. I remember an old woman, frail as parchment, who pressed a sprig of lavender into my hand after I pulled a rotten tooth. To keep the smell of pain away, she whispered. That little kindness lingered longer than any coin. But kindness was rare. More often, it was mockery. The old man shakes. They laughed. Best let the boy cut. The same mouths that once praised me now turned sharp, eager for entertainment at my expense. It reminded me of another old saying, the crowd builds statues and topples them with the same hands. I was no statue, but the fall felt the same. One winter, I treated a fevered child for hours, spooning broth, bleeding just enough, whispering prayers though I doubted they worked. The child survived. The parents wept with joy, swore eternal gratitude. 2 years later, when their second child died of plague, they refused to meet my eyes, crossing the street as if I carried the devil himself. Eternal gratitude lasted exactly as long as their luck held. Sometimes, when the tavern grew loud, I overheard my name tossed around like dice. He saved my uncle, someone would say. Another replied, I, and botched my cousin. I sat in silence, drinking, letting the judgments roll. Praise and blame, both were hollow. Both evaporated with the ale. Here's something off topic but true. Bees will sting the beekeeper even as he cares for them. People aren't so different. You feed them honey, and they'll still sting when they panic. I'd like to say I rose above it. That I learned not to care about their shifting gratitude. But I did care. Every curse carved into me. Every thank you patched me up, only for the next curse to tear me open again. Over time, the cuts of their words left scars deeper than any wound I ever stitched. By the end, I realized the town didn't truly want a healer. They wanted a miracle worker. And since I was no miracle, only a man with blades and thread, their gratitude curdled as fast as milk in summer. So yes, they praised me one day, cursed me the next. They lifted me with cheers, then dragged me down with whispers. And I kept cutting, stitching, bleeding, because what else could I do? Gratitude or not, the chair still filled, the basin still caught blood, and I still stood there, steady or trembling, taking what thanks or curses came. There's a certain sound to an empty chair. You wouldn't think so, but trust me, it creaks differently when no one is sitting in it. My chair, the barber's chair, used to groan under the weight of farmers, soldiers, drunkards, and dying men. The leather, cracked and stained, remembered every twitch and struggle. When it sat empty, though, the silence was heavier than any body. Old wisdom says, an empty seat still holds the shadow of the last man. And I felt that shadow every time I glanced at it, waiting for the next poor soul to slump into place. Some evenings, no one came, no fevered child, no soldier limping, no toothache desperate for relief. I'd sharpen the razors anyway, just in case. The scrape of steel against the whetstone echoed around the room, louder than the tavern outside. I'd tell myself it was preparation, but really, it was a way to fill the silence. Funny thing, when the chair sat unused too long, I grew uneasy, not because I wanted suffering, but because the stillness made me restless. A barber surgeon with no one to bleed was like a fisherman staring at an empty net. Useless. One time, I remember sitting across from that empty chair, staring at it as if it were a person. I half expected it to speak back, to groan at me. Where's everyone? Why aren't they here? Maybe I was losing my mind a little. After all, when you spend enough nights in a room with blood-stained walls, your thoughts get stranger than you'd like to admit. Academic debate here. Did the tools of early medicine shape the healer? Or did the healer's identity shape the tools? You could argue both ways. But I'll tell you this, the chair shaped me. That cursed chair became my confessional, my battlefield, my stage. And when it was empty, I felt like a performer waiting for an audience that never came. Quirky fact: some barbers in Europe painted their chairs bright red. Not for decoration, but because the stains of blood blended better. Mine was just brown and cracked. But I sometimes wished for red, it would have been more honest. When the plague rolled through, the chair was never empty. People lined up, desperate, sweating, shaking. I barely had time to wipe the blades between patients. And yet, after the plague passed, there came weeks when no one showed. Everyone either dead or too frightened to risk my hands. That silence was worse than the chaos. It was like the town had forgotten me altogether. Odd thing, on nights when the chair sat empty, I could hear the tavern laughter outside more clearly. The world carried on without me. Ale flowing, songs slurred, dice clattering on tables. I sat in my room, waiting for a knock that never came. There's a loneliness to being needed only in suffering. One evening, I lit a candle and sat in the chair myself. I wanted to know what it felt like from the other side. The leather stuck to my arms. The straps brushed against my wrists. For a moment, I imagined what all those men had seen. Me, looming above, tools glinting, the smell of soap and iron. I shivered. Maybe they weren't wrong to fear me. Here's an off-topic thought. Cats always know when you're watching them. They'll turn their head slow, blink, then look away like you're beneath their notice. That chair was like a cat, silent, smug, reminding me it didn't need me as much as I needed it. As the years went on, the chair sagged, bolts loosening, leather splitting. I fixed it more than once. Hammering nails, binding straps, stitching patches, keeping it alive, because somehow, it was more than wood and leather. It was a witness, a partner in my trade. But toward the end, the emptiness came more often. My hands shook, my eyes blurred, and people began to whisper that the old man wasn't steady anymore. They sought out younger cutters, steadier hands. The chair waited, but fewer bodies came. I'd still sit there some nights. Tools laid out in ritual order: razor, scalpel, thread, bowl. I'd wait for the knock, the groan of the door. And when none came, I'd mutter to myself, maybe tomorrow. The cruelest irony? The chair, which once held the lives of so many, would one day hold mine. I pictured it often, me slumping into it, breath shallow, my own tools just out of reach. No healer left to stitch me. Just the empty chair, finally full, swallowing me the way it swallowed everyone else. That thought used to terrify me. Now, it comforts me in a strange way. At least I won't die on the floor. At least I'll be cradled by the same wood and leather that bore witness to my entire life's work. So yes, the chair is empty tonight, but I can still hear its creak, feel its shadow, see its cracked grin, and I know it's only waiting. Steel has a language all its own. If you've ever held a razor to the light, tilted it just right, you'll hear it whisper, not in words, but in that faint hiss as it slices air. The tools of my trade were never silent. They scraped, they clinked, they rang like tiny bells, and they whispered to me long after the patients left. Old wisdom says, a dull blade cuts twice as deep. That was drilled into me early. Keep it sharp, keep it clean. The whetstone became as familiar to me as bread or sleep. Hours I spent grinding steel, listening to the rasp, waiting for that perfect keen edge. Sometimes I swear the blade hummed when it was ready, like it was eager for work. Each tool had its own voice. The lancet sang when it pierced a vein, a tiny hiss followed by a rush. The saw moaned in slow rhythm through bone. The shears snapped like a crow's beak. My favorite, if I'm allowed to have one, was the razor. It whispered in long strokes, smoothing, shaving, or slicing clean. Quirky fact: steel was so precious in some towns that barbers locked their razors in boxes as if they were holy relics. I never had a box, just a drawer, but sometimes I treated them as if they were sacred. A man can grow attached to the instruments that keep him alive. Academic debate: do tools define the healer? Or does the healer define the tools? I leaned toward the tools. You can be the kindest man alive, but give him a blunt blade and he'll still butcher. Yet a trembling hand with a sharp razor sometimes succeeds where skill alone might fail. Steel doesn't lie. I remember one evening sharpening late. The tavern noise leaked in. Men shouting dice rolls. My whetstone rasped steady. I thought I heard voices in the blade itself, echoes of all who had screamed under it. Was it madness? Maybe. Or maybe steel remembers. Odd detail. Soldiers often kissed their swords before battle, whispering prayers into the metal. I never kissed my razor, but sometimes I spoke to it. Be steady, I'd mutter. Don't betray me tonight. And if the cut went clean, I thanked it like an old friend. There's an intimacy in steel meeting flesh, softer than you'd expect, like slicing fruit. Warmth follows, then resistance. The sound, not a scream, not a groan, but that first wet gasp of the body opening, still plays in my head. The blade never shouts, it only whispers. On the battlefield, steel was louder. Saws gnawed, clanged, snapped, yet even then, amid the chaos, I could hear the individual voices. A soldier once told me he could sleep to the sound of my whetstone. Said it was more soothing than a lullaby. I laughed, but part of me agreed. That scraping rhythm had become my heartbeat. Off topic but true. Blacksmiths say a blade has a soul. Forged in fire, tempered by water. Maybe they're right. I never forged mine, but I fed them enough blood to give them spirit. My tools outlasted patience, outlasted friends, maybe even outlasted my youth. Some were passed down from my master, edges worn smooth by decades of hands. Others I bought from tinkers, still carrying the smell of forged smoke. Each one joined the choir of whispers, and together they sang my life's work. Sometimes, though, I feared them, a slip, a tremor, and the steel turned traitor. I cut myself more than once. Small nicks that bled longer than they should. Each nick reminded me I wasn't master of the tools, they merely tolerated me. Toward the end, my hearing dimmed. I thought maybe I'd lose the whispers too. But no, the blades grew louder. Every scrape, every rasp, every hiss of steel against skin seemed amplified. Maybe it was their way of reminding me they were still there. Waiting. The chair may grow empty. The tavern may fall silent. But the whisper of steel never fades. Even now, I hear it in the quiet. A song of edges, of patience, of inevitability. The tools don't mourn, don't rejoice. They only whisper. Work, work, work. And when I finally rest, when no one comes knocking, I think the steel will keep whispering long after I'm gone. Perhaps someone else will take it up. Hear the same voices, sharpen the same edge, or maybe it will lie in the drawer, humming faintly to itself, dreaming of flesh. Either way, the steel never sleeps. I've carried many secrets in these trembling hands. Some belong to the town, some to the battlefield, and some only to me. But as the years wear thin, I feel a pull to lay them down, to confess, not to a priest, not to a judge, but to the empty chair and to you listening now. Old wisdom says, a man's last words are the mirror of his soul. If that's true, then let mine be crooked, cracked, but honest. I confess I was afraid more often than I ever admitted. Each time a man sat in the chair, each time I held a blade above his skin, I felt the weight of his life balanced on my wrist. Outwardly, I joked, muttered comfort, pretended certainty. Inside, I begged the steel not to betray me. I confess I sometimes cut too deep. Not always by accident. Once, a thief who had terrorized the town came to me for a bleeding. His eyes were cruel, his smile smug. My hand slipped, at least that's what I claimed. The basin filled too fast. His face paled, and he never left the chair alive. People whispered about divine justice. I said nothing, but my conscience still chews on that slip. Quirky fact, maybe fitting here. Some surgeons were buried with their tools, sealed in coffins as if the blades would be needed in the afterlife. I don't want that. Let the steel rest without me. I've heard its whispers long enough. Here's the academic debate. Do healers bear responsibility for outcomes beyond their skill? I think about this more than I should. If a man dies of fever after I bleed him, is it my fault for trying? Or the fever's fault for winning? Philosophers argue endlessly, but alone at night, the answer feels heavier than logic can hold. I confess I grew to love the sound of pain. Not because I enjoyed suffering, no, not exactly, but because it meant I was still in the fight. A groan, a gasp, even a scream meant the patient still lived, still resisted. Silence was always worse. Silence meant I had failed. I confess I lied, often, told mothers their sons would be fine when I knew they wouldn't. Told soldiers they'd walk again when I'd already sharpened the saw. Lies are kinder than truth sometimes, though the lies stained me deeper than the blood ever did. Here's an off-topic truth. Ravens learn to mimic human voices if they hear them enough. I wonder if one ever learned my voice, whispering back my lies in the trees. I confess I grew jealous, too, when younger surgeons came with steadier hands, with brighter eyes. I mocked them quietly, called them reckless, but really, I envied their certainty, their unshaken grip. Age makes your pride brittle, like old wood. Most of all, I confess I never knew if I was truly a healer or simply a dealer in suffering. Some rose from my chair, smiling, alive. Others slumped, never to rise again. Was I a savior or an executioner? I'll let history decide, though I doubt it will care. I used to dream of building a legacy, of being remembered as the great barber surgeon of my town. But now, I see it clearer. Memory fades, whispers die, and the chair will one day be dust. My legacy, if any, lives only in the scars I left, lines across arms, legs, faces, faint reminders etched into skin long after my name is forgotten. So here is my final confession. I was never a miracle worker. I was never holy, never chosen, never destined for greatness. I was just a man with steel, thread, and shaking hands. I tried. Sometimes I failed. Sometimes I didn't. That's all. And if you ever sit in a chair like mine, feel the straps, smell the iron, hear the faint whisper of steel, remember me. Not as a saint, not as a butcher, but as someone who bore the burden of trying when no one else would. That is all the truth I have left. The candle burns low now, and my words slow with it. You've walked with me through the alleys and the taverns, the plague years and the battle tents, through the praise and curses. And now you stand with me at the edge of silence. I want to leave you not with sharpness, but with softness. For all the steel, the straps, the blood and whispers, there was always a thread of care woven through my work. If you look closely enough, you can see it, faint but present. The way I held a child's hand steady. The way I soothed a soldier with a story. The way I cleaned my blades with almost reverence. Perhaps that is the truest part of the healer's craft, not perfection. Not miracle, but a quiet persistence in the face of suffering. We try, even when we doubt, even when our hands shake. Even when gratitude curdles to hatred, we keep trying, because to stop would be to abandon more than just a body. It would be to abandon our own fragile claim to kindness. So, as the candle fades, I invite you to rest. Let the whispers of steel drift into the distance. Let the empty chair blur, until it becomes only a shadow. Let the burden of blood and failure fall away. You are safe here. You are not in the chair. You are simply listening, breathing, alive. And now, let the words dissolve into quiet. The story has ended. The night carries on. The whispers are gone.